Samuel Cooper's weathered hand froze on Liberty's collar, his breath catching as the German shepherd's hackles rose in perfect stillness at the cave mouth. The 11-year-old dog hadn't moved like this since Afghanistan, body coiled, ears forward, nose twitching at something invisible in the darkness ahead. This wasn't supposed to be anything more than a worthless hole in the Arkansas mountains. Liberty's low whine shattered the morning quiet, her arthritic legs trembling as she pulled toward the cave entrance with an urgency Sam hadn't seen in years. The sound echoed off limestone walls, carrying a note of desperate recognition that made his chest tighten with memories of war zones and missing soldiers. His dead wife's medical bills sat unpaid on the kitchen table, $47,000 worth of final notices. This inheritance from a grandfather he'd never known was supposed to be his last disappointment, not his salvation. But Liberty knew something. After 30 years as his partner, she'd never been wrong about danger. What lay hidden in those depths that could make a dying dog come alive again? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 months earlier, Samuel Cooper had stood in this same spot staring at the crumpled legal papers that had arrived with his grandfather's death certificate. Henry Blackwood, a man he'd never met, never even heard mentioned in family conversations, had left him 47 acres of worthless Arkansas mountain land and a cave that local real estate agents laughed about behind closed doors. At 67, Sam carried the weight of 2 wars and 2 kinds of loss. Vietnam had taken his youth and left him with shrapnel in his left knee that ached before storms. Cancer had taken his wife Rebecca 2 years ago, along with their savings, their home, and his reason to get up most mornings. The only constant in his crumbling world was Liberty, the German shepherd, who'd been his partner through everything since he'd adopted her from a military K-9 retirement program 8 years earlier. Liberty wasn't just getting old. She was dying. The arthritis medication alone cost $300 a month, money Sam scraped together by choosing between groceries and gas. Her once glossy coat had dulled to pewter gray, and the powerful legs that had once carried her through obstacle courses now trembled when she climbed the porch steps of their rented trailer. Margaret Walsh, his 75-year-old neighbor, had become their unlikely guardian angel. The silver-haired widow appeared at his door every few days with casseroles, homemade biscuits, and gentle conversation that filled the hollow spaces Rebecca's death had carved out of his life. Margaret understood loneliness. Her husband had died 5 years earlier, and her children lived scattered across different states, calling only on holidays. "That cave might be worth something after all, Samuel," Margaret had said just last week, her weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug at his kitchen table. "My Harold used to say these mountains hold more secrets than most folks realize. Maybe your grandfather knew something the rest of us don't." Sam had inherited medical debt that would follow him to his grave, a dog whose medication cost more than his grocery budget, and a widow's kindness that kept him from giving up entirely. The cave represented his last shot at financial stability, or at least enough money to ensure Liberty's remaining years would be comfortable. But as he watched his dog's intense focus on the cave entrance, Sam wondered if Henry Blackwood's final gift might be more than worthless rock and darkness after all. Liberty's behavior changed the moment they entered the cave system. Her arthritic limbs moved with newfound purpose, nose pressed to the limestone floor as she followed an invisible trail deeper into the mountain's belly. Sam's flashlight beam danced across walls marked with ancient water stains and the occasional initials carved by decades of teenage explorers. But Liberty ignored these human traces entirely. 50 feet into the main chamber, she stopped at what appeared to be solid rock face and began pawing at a section near the base of the wall. Her whines grew more insistent, the same urgent sound she'd made in Afghanistan when she'd detected explosive devices buried in roadside debris. "What is it, girl?" Sam knelt beside her, running his weathered hands along the limestone surface. His fingers found what his eyes had missed, a hairline crack that traced the outline of a rectangular section approximately 2 feet square. When he pressed against it, the stone panel shifted inward with a grinding sound that echoed through the chamber. Behind the false wall lay a metal ammunition box, the kind Sam remembered from his army days. The container showed rust along its edges, but remained structurally sound. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were documents that made Sam's hands shake as he read them by flashlight. The papers bore official military letterhead from 1971 detailing classified operations in Vietnam. At the center of the file was a report signed by Major William Hartley, documenting unauthorized civilian casualties during what the documents called Phoenix Program activities. The report accused Colonel James Sterling and his subordinates of systematic murder and cover-up, complete with witness statements and photographic evidence, but it was the final page that stopped Sam's breath entirely. A handwritten note, dated just 2 years ago in careful cursive. Samuel, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and the truth needs to come out. Henry Blackwood was not your grandfather. I killed him in 1972 and took his identity to hide these documents. My real name is Thomas Garrett, and I was Major Hartley's aide. The Sterling family must never find this evidence. Trust no one. T.G. Sam was still processing this revelation when footsteps echoed from the cave entrance. He quickly secured the documents and helped Liberty to her feet, both of them moving deeper into the chamber's shadows. "Mr. Cooper," the voice was cultured, confident. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I'm Marcus Sterling with the Historical Preservation Society." The man who emerged into Sam's flashlight beam was in his mid-40s, wearing expensive outdoor gear that had never seen real use. His silver-streaked hair was perfectly styled, and his smile carried the practiced warmth of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. "I understand you've inherited some property that might have historical significance," Sterling continued, his eyes scanning the chamber with obvious familiarity. "We'd like to make you an offer. A generous one, enough to cover any outstanding debts and provide comfortable retirement." The figure he named was staggering, $200,000 for land that couldn't be worth more than $30,000 on the open market. Sam felt Liberty tense beside him, her body language screaming danger in ways Sterling couldn't interpret, but Sam understood perfectly. "That's quite an offer for a worthless cave," Sam said carefully. "Not worthless at all," Sterling replied, his smile never wavering. "This region has significant historical value related to early settlement patterns. We believe there may be artifacts here that could prove quite valuable to researchers." But his eyes weren't focused on historical artifacts. They kept returning to the spot where Liberty had discovered the hidden compartment. This man knew something about what lay hidden in these walls. "I'll need time to think about it," Sam said. Sterling's expression flickered just for a moment, revealing something cold beneath the polished exterior. "Of course. But I should mention that time is a factor. We have other sites under consideration and funding decisions need to be made quickly. Shall we say 3 days?" After Sterling left, Sam and Liberty made their way back to the trailer in heavy silence. Margaret was waiting on his porch with a plate of fried chicken and a concerned expression. "I saw that fancy car leave," she said. "Everything all right, Samuel?" Sam found himself studying his neighbor's face with new suspicion. Who could he trust when everyone seemed to know more about his inheritance than he did? But Margaret's worry appeared genuine, and Liberty showed no signs of alarm in her presence. "Someone wants to buy the cave," Sam said finally. Margaret's eyebrows rose. "For good money, I hope." "Too good, maybe." The elderly woman nodded slowly. "Harold used to say when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. But sometimes, Samuel, desperate times call for taking chances." Her eyes drifted to Liberty, who was struggling to climb the porch steps. That dog needs expensive care, and pride won't pay for it. As night fell, Sam sat at his kitchen table, medical bills on one side, mysterious documents on the other, wondering if his grandfather's final gift would save him or destroy him. The next morning brought Liberty's worst episode yet. Sam found her collapsed beside her water bowl, breathing shallow and rapid, her gums pale as winter sky. The emergency veterinarian's diagnosis hit like shrapnel. Advanced heart disease requiring immediate intervention. Surgery would cost $15,000 with no guarantee of success. Without treatment, she has maybe 2 weeks, Dr. Harrison said, his voice professionally gentle. With surgery, we might buy her a year, possibly 2, but at her age... Sam sat in the clinic parking lot afterward, Liberty heavy and warm in his lap, both of them staring at a future that had just shortened to days instead of years. Sterling's offer suddenly felt less like temptation and more like salvation. That afternoon, he returned to the cave with desperate purpose. If there were more documents hidden in these walls, he needed to find them before making any decisions. Liberty, despite her condition, insisted on accompanying him, her breathing labored but her determination unshakable. This time she led him past the first chamber into passages he hadn't explored. The beam of his heavy-duty flashlight revealed a cavern system far more extensive than he'd imagined. 50 yards deeper, Liberty stopped at another wall section and began her urgent pawing routine. This hidden compartment was larger, containing multiple ammunition boxes. The documents inside told a story that made Sam's blood run cold. Major William Hartley hadn't just documented war crimes, he'd been systematically gathering evidence of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of military command. The Phoenix program had been a cover for something far worse, the systematic elimination of American soldiers who'd witnessed unauthorized operations. Sam's own unit had been mentioned in the reports. Names he remembered, faces he'd carried for 50 years, men who'd supposedly died in combat but had actually been murdered by their own commanders. The implications were staggering. Dozens of families had lived with lies about how their sons had died. But it was the final box that contained the most shocking revelation. Among the military documents was a birth certificate from Saigon, dated 1975. The child's name was Marcus Sterling. The father's name, Colonel James Sterling. The mother, Lin Nguyen, described as a local interpreter. Marcus Sterling wasn't just interested in covering up his father's war crimes. He was trying to bury evidence of his own Vietnamese heritage. Sam was photographing the documents with his phone when Liberty's low growl announced they were no longer alone. Margaret Walsh emerged from the passage behind them, moving with surprising agility for a woman her age. "I thought you might come back here," she said, her voice carrying none of its usual warmth. Harold always said you'd figure it out eventually." "Margaret?" Sam struggled to process this shift. "How did you know about the cave? Samuel, I've known about this place longer than you've been alive." She stepped closer, and in the flashlight's harsh glare, her face looked different. Harder, calculating. "My name isn't Margaret Walsh. It's Martha Hartley. Major William Hartley was my husband." The documents scattered as Sam stood, Liberty pressing close to his legs. "Your husband? 50 years I've been waiting for someone to find this evidence. 50 years of living under a false identity, watching the Sterling family prosper while my husband's reputation rotted in unmarked graves." Her voice cracked with decades of suppressed rage. "William died trying to expose what they did. They made it look like an accident, just like they did with your grandfather, the real Henry Blackwood. You knew Thomas Garrett? I helped him steal Blackwood's identity after William was murdered. We thought if we could hide the evidence long enough, someday the truth would come out. But the Sterlings have been hunting these documents for decades." Sam felt the walls of the cave pressing closer. Marcus Sterling. Is James Sterling's son with a Vietnamese woman he abandoned when Saigon fell? The boy found his father's family 20 years ago, learned about the missing evidence. He's been systematically tracking down anyone connected to the Phoenix investigation. Liberty's breathing had become more labored during this revelation, her body trembling against Sam's legs. Martha noticed, and her expression softened slightly. That dog doesn't have much time, does she? The surgery would cost more than you have. But I can help with that, Samuel. I've been saving money for 50 years waiting for this moment. I'll pay for Liberty's operation, cover all your debts, set you up for life. All I need is your help getting that evidence to the right people. What kind of help? Martha's smile was thin and cold. Marcus Sterling will be back tomorrow with a team. He's not going to take no for an answer this time. But if we work together, we can ensure this evidence reaches the media before he can bury it forever. As if summoned by her words, the sound of vehicle engines echoed from outside the cave. Multiple engines, approaching fast. They're early, Martha whispered, her face pale. Samuel, whatever happens, don't let them take those documents. Too many people died to protect this truth. Liberty struggled to her feet, positioning herself between Sam and the cave entrance despite her weakness. Her loyalty transcended her physical limitations, and Sam felt his heart breaking at her bravery. The first flashlight beam cut through the darkness, followed by voices that carried authority and menace. Marcus Sterling's cultured tones echoed off the limestone walls. Mr. Cooper, I believe we need to have a more direct conversation about your inheritance. Sam grabbed the ammunition boxes, his mind racing through impossible choices. Trust Martha, whose motives remained unclear despite her revelations. Surrender to Sterling, who might be seeking justice for his abandoned mother as much as covering up his father's crimes, or find some third option that could save both Liberty's life and honor the sacrifices of the men who died protecting this evidence. The footsteps were getting closer, and Liberty's breathing was becoming more shallow by the minute. Sterling's voice carried a different tone now, less polished businessman, more military commander. Mr. Cooper, I know you're in there. We need to discuss your grandfather's collection before this situation becomes unnecessarily complicated. Sam pressed himself against the cavern wall, Martha beside him, both watching as multiple flashlight beams swept the main chamber. Liberty's labored breathing seemed impossibly loud in the enclosed space. He's brought at least 4 men, Martha whispered. Professional security, not historians. Through the darkness, Sam counted the lights, 5 distinct beams, moving with tactical precision. These weren't academics, they moved like soldiers, covering angles and communicating through hand signals he recognized from his own military training. Sterling's cultured voice echoed again. I understand your hesitation, Mr. Cooper. The documents you found paint my family in an unfavorable light. But there are complexities here that you don't understand. Sam made a decision that surprised even himself. I'm listening, Sterling. But first, tell me about your mother. The silence that followed stretched long enough that Sam wondered if Sterling had heard him. When the response came, it carried a weight of old pain. My mother was Lin Nguyen. She worked as an interpreter for American forces in Saigon. She was 19 when she met my father. Sterling's voice moved closer, but the tactical lights held their positions. When the city fell in 1975, Colonel Sterling evacuated with the other American personnel. He left her behind with a 2-year-old son she'd named for him. Martha's sharp intake of breath was audible. The coward abandoned his own child. We survived the re-education camps, Sterling continued, his voice carrying across the cavern. Barely. My mother died when I was 12, malnutrition and diseases that could have been treated if we'd had access to proper medical care. I came to America in 1995 through a refugee program, carrying nothing but her stories about the American father who'd promised to bring us home. Sam felt the moral complexity of the situation shifting beneath him like unstable ground. So, you found him. I found his grave. James Sterling died of a heart attack in 1987, taking his secrets with him. But I also found his family's prosperity, built on military contracts and government connections that stemmed directly from his Vietnam service. The bitterness in Sterling's voice was unmistakable. While my mother starved in a communist prison, the Sterling family was building an empire on the foundation of my father's war crimes. Liberty struggled to stand, her breathing becoming more distressed. Sam knelt beside her, feeling her rapid heartbeat beneath his palm. The dog who'd saved his sanity after Rebecca's death was slipping away while he debated moral philosophy in a cave. "The documents you've found," Sterling said, his voice closer now. "They don't just implicate my father. They implicate dozens of officers, hundreds of soldiers who followed orders they thought were legitimate. Publishing this evidence would destroy families, ruin careers, create a scandal that would echo for generations." "Good," Martha said sharply. "Maybe it's time for the truth." "The truth?" Sterling stepped into the light, revealing a face that carried both American and Vietnamese features, marked by years of hardship. "The truth is that my father was both a war criminal and a victim of a system that created monsters out of ordinary men. The truth is that exposing these crimes won't bring back the dead, but it will destroy the living." Sam studied Sterling's face, seeing something he hadn't expected. Genuine anguish rather than calculated manipulation. "Then, what do you want?" "Justice, but not the kind that comes from newspaper headlines and congressional hearings." Sterling's men remained in position, weapons visible but not raised. "The Sterling Family Foundation has been quietly providing reparations to Vietnamese families affected by Phoenix operations for 20 years. We've funded schools, hospitals, reconciliation programs. We've been trying to make amends the only way we knew how." "Blood money," Martha spat. "You can't buy forgiveness for genocide." "Maybe not," Sterling admitted. "But we can try to prevent future atrocities by learning from past mistakes. The Foundation has been working with the Pentagon to reform military justice systems, to create oversight mechanisms that might prevent another Phoenix program." Liberty's whine brought Sam back to immediate realities. His dog was dying while they debated historical justice. "This is all very noble," he said, his voice rougher than intended, "but my dog needs surgery. She can't wait for historical reckoning." Sterling's expression softened. "The Foundation covers medical expenses for veterans and their families. That includes service animals. If you'll work with us, help us manage this information responsibly rather than exposing it destructively, we'll ensure Liberty receives the best possible care." "Don't trust him, Samuel," Martha warned. "This is exactly how they've operated for 50 years, buying silence, manipulating victims, controlling the narrative." "And what's your solution?" Sam demanded. "Dump everything to the media and let the chips fall where they may. How many innocent families get destroyed in the crossfire?" Martha's face hardened. "Sometimes innocent people pay the price for other people's crimes. That's what war is." Liberty's collapse was sudden and complete. One moment she was sitting beside Sam, the next she was lying on her side, breathing in short, desperate gasps. Sam dropped to his knees beside her, feeling for a pulse that was rapid and thready. "She's going into cardiac arrest," Sterling called out, moving closer despite the tactical situation. "We have a medical technician with our team, former Army medic. He might be able to stabilize her long enough to reach a veterinary hospital." Sam faced an impossible choice. Trust the man whose family had covered up war crimes for decades, or watch Liberty die while maintaining moral purity. The decision, took less than a second. "Help her," he said. Sterling's medic was a compact man in his 30s who moved with efficient calm. He administered oxygen from a portable tank while checking Liberty's vitals, his hands gentle despite their clinical precision. "She needs immediate surgery," the medic confirmed. "I can keep her stable for maybe 30 minutes, but that's all." "There's a veterinary emergency hospital 40 minutes from here," Sterling said. "We have a helicopter on standby." The irony wasn't lost on Sam. The enemy was now his ally, united by concern for a dying dog. Martha watched the proceedings with obvious disgust. "This is how it starts, Samuel. First they help with the dog, then they ask for small favors. Then gradually you're complicit in their cover-up. 50 years from now, you'll be the one making deals to protect secrets." But as Sam watched Sterling's team carefully lift Liberty onto an improvised stretcher, he saw something that complicated Martha's narrative. These men weren't treating the situation as a tactical operation. They were genuinely concerned about saving an animal's life. During the helicopter ride to the veterinary hospital, Sterling sat across from Sam. Both men focused on Liberty's labored breathing. The documents remained in the cave, guarded by Sterling's team and Martha's watchful presence. "My mother had a dog during the war," Sterling said quietly, his voice barely audible over the helicopter's rotors. "A mixed breed she found as a puppy after an artillery strike. She used to say that animals were the only innocent victims of human conflicts. They suffered without understanding why." "What happened to the dog?" "She ate it during the famine winter of 1976. Sterling's face was stone. "Survival makes monsters of us all, Mr. Cooper. The question is whether we learn from our monstrous moments or let them define us." At the animal hospital, Sterling's influence opened doors that would normally have remained closed. Liberty was rushed into surgery within minutes of arrival, attended by the facility's best cardiac specialist. The $15,000 cost was handled with a single phone call. While they waited, Sam found himself studying Sterling with new eyes. This man wasn't the calculating villain Martha had described. He was someone trying to balance justice with practicality, carrying his own wounds from a war that had ended before Sam's generation had finished fighting it. "The documents in the cave," Sam said finally. "What happens to them?" "That depends on you," Sterling replied. "We can work together to ensure the information serves justice rather than vengeance. Identify living victims who deserve reparations. Reform military systems to prevent future abuses. Or we can let Martha turn it into a media spectacle that destroys innocent people while the real criminals escape consequences because they're already dead." 3 hours later, the veterinarian emerged with cautious optimism. Liberty had survived the surgery, though her recovery would be lengthy and expensive. Sterling handled the financial arrangements without hesitation, adding long-term care provisions that would ensure Liberty's comfort for the remainder of her life. But as they prepared to return to the cave, Sam realized the most difficult choices still lay ahead. Martha waited with 50 years of justified anger and demands for public revelation. Sterling offered private justice and practical solutions, and somewhere in the balance between truth and mercy, Sam would have to decide what honor required. The helicopter lifted off into darkness, carrying them back toward a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of decades-old secrets, but the meaning of justice itself. The helicopter descended through darkness toward the cave site, where portable floodlights now illuminated what had been a hidden secret for half a century. Sterling's security team had established a perimeter, but Martha Hartley stood defiantly at the cave entrance, clutching one of the ammunition boxes like a shield against decades of injustice. "You brought him back," she called out as Sam approached, her voice carrying bitter satisfaction. "I wondered if you'd choose the dog over the truth." Sam felt the weight of her accusation, but Liberty's successful surgery had clarified something fundamental in his mind. Sometimes the truth and mercy don't have to be enemies, Martha. Mercy? Her laugh was harsh in the artificial light. Tell that to the wives who never knew their husbands were murdered by their own commanders. Tell that to the Vietnamese families who lost children to American death squads. Tell that to my William, who died trying to expose these monsters. Sterling stepped forward, his hands visible and empty. Mrs. Hartley, I understand your anger. My mother carried similar rage until the day she died, but publishing these documents won't bring our dead back to life. No, but it might prevent future atrocities. Martha's grip on the ammunition box tightened. How many cover-ups have there been since Vietnam? How many secrets are still being buried while families of the powerful profit from war? The question hung in the night air like an accusation. Sam found himself thinking of his own military service, the orders that had sometimes made his stomach turn, the reports that had been classified beyond his clearance level. You're right, Sterling said quietly. There have been other cover-ups, other Phoenix programs by different names. That's why the Foundation has been working within the system to create accountability mechanisms. Working within the system? Martha's voice rose to near shouting. The system that created these atrocities in the first place? The system that's been protecting war criminals for 50 years? Sam stepped between them, feeling the conversation spiraling toward violence. Both of you stop. This isn't about who's more righteous or who's suffered more. This is about what we do with information that could destroy innocent people while the guilty are already dead. Innocent people? Martha's eyes blazed. The Sterling family built their fortune on blood money. How are they innocent? Because I didn't choose my father, Sterling said, his voice carrying a weariness that spoke of years defending this position. Because my children didn't choose their grandfather. Because punishing people for crimes they didn't commit isn't justice. It's revenge. Martha's response was interrupted by the arrival of two unmarked black SUVs. Sam's military training kicked in as he recognized the bearing of the men who emerged, federal agents, moving with the kind of authority that made local law enforcement step aside. The lead agent was a woman in her 50s, graying hair pulled back severely, badge visible on her belt. I'm Agent Patricia Hayes, FBI. We've been monitoring this situation for some time. Monitoring how? Sam demanded. Your phone calls to various veterans organizations about your inheritance were flagged in our system. The Phoenix program documents have been classified at the highest levels for decades. Their exposure represents a matter of national security. Sterling's security team tensed, hands moving toward concealed weapons. The FBI agents mirrored the movement, creating a standoff in the artificial light of the cave entrance. National security, Martha said with bitter laughter. The last refuge of war criminals. How many atrocities have been hidden behind those two words? Agent Hayes focused on Martha with professional calm. Mrs. Hartley, and yes, we know who you really are. Your husband's investigation was terminated not because it threatened criminals, but because it threatened ongoing intelligence operations that were saving American lives. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Martha stumbled backward, her grip on the ammunition box loosening. That's impossible. William was trying to expose murder. Major Hartley was compromising networks that were infiltrating North Vietnamese command structures. His investigation would have revealed American agents embedded in enemy organizations, resulting in their execution and the loss of intelligence that helped end the war. Sam felt the ground shifting beneath everything he'd believed about this situation. You're saying the cover-up was justified? I'm saying that moral choices during wartime rarely offer clean solutions, Hayes replied. The Phoenix program included legitimate counterintelligence operations alongside the criminal activities your documents expose. Separating the two has been classified work for 50 years. Sterling's face had gone pale. My mother's suffering, the abandonment of Vietnamese collaborators, that was part of protecting intelligence networks? Some of it, yes. Not all. Your father made choices that were both necessary and inexcusable, often in the same operation. Hayes stepped closer to the group. This is why these documents have remained classified. The truth is too complex for public consumption, too nuanced for media coverage, too painful for the families involved. Martha's voice was barely a whisper. Then William died for nothing. Major Hartley died trying to do what he believed was right. That's not nothing. That's the definition of honor. Hayes gestured toward the cave. But his investigation would have gotten good people killed while exposing crimes that were already being addressed through military justice channels. The weight of this revelation settled over the group like a shroud. Sam found himself questioning every assumption he'd made since discovering the documents. If the truth was this complex, what did justice even mean? "So what happens now?" he asked. "That depends on what you all decide to do with this information," Hayes replied. "The FBI has been working with the Sterling Foundation for years, using their resources to provide reparations while protecting ongoing intelligence operations. We can continue that arrangement, or we can allow this situation to escalate into a public scandal that accomplishes nothing except satisfying desire for revenge." Martha set down the ammunition box with shaking hands. 50 years. 50 years I've been living a lie, waiting for vindication that was always impossible. Sterling approached her slowly, his hands visible and open. "Mrs. Hartley, the work your husband did, the evidence he gathered, it did make a difference. The military justice reforms implemented after Vietnam were based partly on his investigations. Lives were saved because of his courage. But not his reputation, not his honor. Honor isn't about public recognition," Sam said quietly, thinking of the soldiers he'd known who'd died in obscurity, their sacrifices known only to the men who'd served beside them. Honor is about doing what's right, regardless of who notices. Liberty's absence from this conversation felt profound to Sam. Throughout his military service, through Rebecca's illness and death, through every major decision of his adult life, his dog had been at his side. Now, recovering from surgery in a sterile hospital room, she was missing the moment when her discovery would reshape multiple lives. Agent Hayes checked her watch. "I need decisions, people. We have media contacts who've been asking questions about unusual activity in this area. We can either manage this situation professionally or let it explode into a public circus that helps no one." "What kind of professional management?" Sterling asked. "The documents are turned over to appropriate federal authorities. The Sterling Foundation continues its reparations work with enhanced oversight. Mrs. Hartley receives recognition for her husband's service through appropriate military channels. Mr. Cooper receives compensation for his cooperation and assistance with his dog's ongoing medical needs." It was a neat solution that satisfied everyone's practical needs while ignoring the deeper questions of justice and truth. Sam found himself wondering what Rebecca would have advised. What choice would honor both the dead and the living? "There's something else," he said slowly. "These documents mention other locations, other caches of evidence. This isn't the only hiding place." The silence that followed was electric with possibility and danger. Hayes stepped closer, her professional calm showing cracks. "What other locations?" Sam pulled out his phone, showing the photographs he'd taken of the documents. According to these records, Major Hartley created a network of evidence caches across 3 states. This cave was just one node in a larger system. Martha's intake of breath was audible. "William never told me about other sites." "He was protecting you," Sterling said. "If you'd been captured, you could only reveal what you knew." Hayes was already making phone calls, mobilizing resources that had been waiting decades for this moment. The revelation had transformed a local situation into a national security operation with implications that stretched far beyond Arkansas mountains. As federal agents began coordinating with Sterling's security team to secure additional sites, Sam realized that his simple inheritance had become the key to unlocking secrets that could reshape historical understanding of American involvement in Vietnam. But watching Martha's face as she processed 50 years of misdirected grief, he wondered if some secrets were too painful to bear, regardless of their historical importance. The call came at 3 in the morning, jarring Sam from restless sleep in the motel room where Agent Hayes had stationed him for protective custody. The voice on the other end was Dr. Harrison from the veterinary hospital, and the words hit Sam like incoming artillery. "Mr. Cooper, I'm afraid Liberty has taken a turn for the worse. Her body is rejecting the surgical repairs. We're doing everything we can, but you should come immediately." Sam's hands shook as he dressed, the weight of the last 48 hours crushing down on him. He'd thought the worst was over. The surgery successful, the documents secured, some form of justice finally within reach. Now Liberty, his last connection to hope and sanity, was slipping away while he played politics with federal agents and war criminals. The hospital's fluorescent lights felt harsh after the cave's darkness. Dr. Harrison met him in the hallway, his expression carrying the careful neutrality that medical professionals use when delivering devastating news. "The damage to her heart was more extensive than we initially realized," the veterinarian explained. "The stress of the last few days, combined with her age and underlying conditions, has overwhelmed her system. Her kidneys are beginning to fail." Through the observation window, Sam could see Liberty lying motionless on the examination table, various tubes and monitors attached to her silver coat. The powerful, intelligent animal who had guided him through darkness, both literal and metaphorical, now looked fragile as morning mist. "How long?" Sam asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Hours, maybe less. I'm sorry, Mr. Cooper. Sometimes even successful surgeries can't overcome the accumulated damage of time." Sam entered the room and took his position beside Liberty's head, his weathered hands gentle on her fur. Her breathing was shallow but steady, and when she sensed his presence, her tail managed the faintest movement of recognition. "I'm here, girl," he whispered. "I'm right here." His phone buzzed with an incoming call from Agent Hayes, but he ignored it. Whatever national security crisis was developing could wait. The only thing that mattered now was ensuring Liberty didn't die alone. But even this final vigil was interrupted when Martha Hartley appeared in the doorway, her face drawn with exhaustion and something approaching desperation. "Samuel, we need to talk. Now." "Not now, Martha. Can't you see?" "The other cache sites," she said urgently. "The FBI teams found them, all of them. And what they discovered changes everything we thought we knew." Sam looked from Liberty's peaceful face to Martha's agitated expression. "Whatever they found can wait until—" "Your dog found more than just Williams' evidence, Samuel. She led you to documents that prove the Sterling Foundation hasn't been providing reparations. They've been systematically eliminating witnesses. Marcus Sterling isn't trying to make amends for his father's crimes. He's completing them." The words penetrated Sam's grief-numbed consciousness like ice water. "That's impossible. Sterling saved Liberty's life. Sterling needed you alive long enough to locate all the cache sites. Now that the FBI has secured them, you've become a liability." Martha stepped closer, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "Agent Hayes isn't FBI, Samuel. She's private security working for Sterling. The real FBI doesn't even know about this operation." Sam's military training warred with emotional exhaustion as he processed this claim. "You're telling me everything, the surgery, the federal involvement, the national security angle, it's all fabricated? I'm telling you to look at the evidence. When did Liberty's condition suddenly worsen?" "Right after Sterling's medical technician administered that oxygen." "When did the FBI conveniently arrive?" "Right after Sterling made his phone calls." Liberty's breathing hitched. drawing Sam's attention back to her failing condition. But Martha's words had planted seeds of doubt that grew rapidly in the artificial silence of the medical facility. "Even if you're right," Sam said slowly, "what can we do? If Sterling has the resources to orchestrate this level of deception—" "William left one final fail-safe," Martha interrupted. "One piece of evidence he never documented, never mapped, never told anyone about except me. It's not just proof of the Phoenix program crimes. It's evidence of ongoing operations, current conspiracies that reach into the highest levels of government and private industry." Sam felt the familiar weight of impossible choices settling on his shoulders. Stay with Liberty during her final hours, or pursue a truth that might justify her sacrifice and his grandfather's death. The decision was made when Liberty's eyes opened, focusing on his face with the clarity that had defined their partnership for 8 years. In that gaze, Sam saw not just love and loyalty, but something that looked remarkably like understanding. She seemed to be telling him that some missions were more important than personal comfort, that duty sometimes required leaving the wounded behind to complete the objective. "Where?" he asked Martha. "The old Sterling family cemetery about 20 miles north of here." William discovered that James Sterling wasn't buried there. He's alive, 92 years old, living under medical care at a private facility. The man they buried was a Vietnamese prisoner of war who'd been used for medical experimentation. The revelation hit Sam like a physical blow. If James Sterling was still alive, if the Phoenix program had evolved into ongoing medical experimentation on prisoners, then the scope of the conspiracy was beyond anything he'd imagined. "We have maybe 3 hours before Sterling realizes you've left the hospital," Martha continued. 3 hours to reach the facility, gather evidence, and get it to actual federal authorities before we're both eliminated as security risks. Sam looked down at Liberty, whose breathing had become more labored during Martha's explanation. Leaving her now felt like the ultimate betrayal, abandoning the one being who had never questioned his worth or demanded explanations for his failures. But as he watched her struggle for each breath, he realized that Liberty's legacy wouldn't be defined by how she died, but by what her life had accomplished. She had led him to truth that could save other lives, expose crimes that continued to claim victims, prevent future atrocities from being buried beneath layers of classification and misdirection. "I need 10 minutes alone with her," he said finally. Martha nodded and stepped outside, leaving Sam to face the most difficult goodbye of his life. He knelt beside the examination table, bringing his face close to Liberty's, breathing in the familiar scent of her fur mixed with antiseptic and medical equipment. "You found it, girl," he whispered. "You found what they tried to hide. Now I have to finish what you started." Liberty's tail moved once more, the faintest acknowledgement of his words. Then her breathing began to slow, each exhalation longer than the last, as if she was finally allowing herself to rest after years of vigilant service. Sam stayed with her until the last breath left her body, until the monitors flatlined and the mechanical sounds of life support gave way to profound silence. In that moment, he felt something fundamental break inside himself. Not just grief for a beloved companion, but the severing of his last connection to the man he'd been before the wars, before Rebecca's death, before the weight of accumulated loss had bent his spirit nearly to breaking. But alongside the grief came something harder and more dangerous: absolute clarity of purpose. Sterling had used Liberty's condition as leverage, had potentially hastened her death to maintain control over the situation. Whether through deliberate poisoning or medical manipulation, they had weaponized his love for his dog. That was unforgivable. When he emerged from the hospital room, Martha was waiting with a grim expression that matched his own emotional state. "I'm sorry about Liberty, Samuel. She was a good dog." "She was more than good," Sam replied, his voice carrying the kind of quiet intensity that had once made enemy soldiers surrender without firing a shot. She was the best of us, and now we're going to make sure her death means something. As they walked toward Martha's car, Sam felt the familiar weight of combat missions settling over him. This time, however, he wasn't fighting for abstract concepts like democracy or freedom. He was fighting for liberty's memory, for the truth she had died helping him discover, and for justice that had been denied for too many decades. The war that had defined his generation wasn't over. It had simply evolved. And now it was personal. The Sterling family cemetery sat on a hillside 20 miles north of the cave, surrounded by wrought iron fencing that had seen better decades. Martha parked her sedan behind a stand of oak trees, both of them studying the facility that lay beyond the headstones, a modest medical complex that looked more like a private residence than a healthcare institution. William discovered this place during his investigation, Martha explained, pulling out a worn manila folder. James Sterling didn't die in 1987. He was diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's and moved here for specialized care. The funeral was staged to protect him from war crimes prosecution. Sam studied the building through binoculars Martha had brought. Security cameras were visible at the corners, and a single guard walked a predictable patrol pattern around the perimeter. How do we know he's still alive? Because the Sterling Foundation has been paying for his care for 35 years. $2 million annually, according to these financial records William obtained. Martha's voice carried bitter satisfaction. Marcus has been protecting his father while eliminating everyone who could testify against him. The implications hit Sam like a gut punch. The other witnesses from the cache sites, all dead within the past 5 years, heart attacks, accidents, sudden illnesses, very convenient for the Sterling family. Martha checked her watch. We have maybe 2 hours before they realize you've left the hospital and start tracking us. Sam's military training kicked in as he planned their approach. The facility's security was adequate for protecting an elderly patient, but not designed to stop determined infiltrators with combat experience. The guard's pattern left a 40-second window every 12 minutes where the rear entrance would be unobserved. What exactly are we looking for inside? Sam asked. Proof that James Sterling is alive, medical records showing his cognitive state, and documentation of the ongoing operations he's been directing despite his supposed death. Martha's hands shook slightly as she spoke. William believed Sterling has been using the Alzheimer's diagnosis as cover, pretending to be incompetent while actually coordinating a network of influence that reaches into government agencies, defense contractors, and medical facilities. They waited for the guard's next patrol cycle, then moved quickly across the cemetery and through a gap in the facility's fence that Martha had identified during previous reconnaissance. The rear entrance was secured with an electronic lock that Sam bypassed using techniques learned during special operations training decades earlier. Inside, the facility felt more like an upscale nursing home than a medical prison. Soft lighting, comfortable furniture, and the faint scent of lavender created an atmosphere of peaceful care rather than criminal concealment. But Sam's trained eye noticed details that suggested a more complex purpose: reinforced doors, soundproofed walls, and security cameras positioned to monitor both patients and staff. Martha led him down a carpeted hallway lined with patient rooms, most of them dark and quiet in the early morning hours. At the end of the corridor, light leaked from beneath a door marked Sterling J. Private Suite. Sam's heart hammered as they approached the door. Inside, they could hear the low murmur of voices, one elderly and querulous, the other younger and deferential. "The Cooper situation has been resolved," the younger voice was saying. "The dog died as planned, and Cooper is too grief-stricken to be a threat. We'll eliminate him within the week and close this chapter permanently." Martha's intake of breath was audible. Through the door's window, they could see an elderly man sitting upright in bed, his eyes alert and focused despite his advanced age. Beside him stood Marcus Sterling, holding a tablet and speaking with the crisp efficiency of someone delivering a military briefing. "What about the Hartley woman?" the elderly man asked, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone Sam remembered from recorded briefings during his military service. "More problematic. She's been investigating our operations for years. My recommendation is to stage another accident similar to what we did with her husband." James Sterling, very much alive and mentally competent, nodded approvingly. "Approved. And the federal investigation?" "Contained. Our people inside the Bureau have classified the cave discovery as a matter of national security. The real evidence will disappear into black site storage, and the public will never know it existed." Sam felt rage building in his chest like pressure in a boiler. These men had orchestrated Liberty's death, planned his own murder, and were discussing Martha's elimination with the casual efficiency of ordering breakfast. Worse, they had corrupted federal agencies and used classification authority to bury evidence of ongoing crimes. Martha was recording everything with her phone, but Sam knew recordings could be dismissed as fabricated. They needed physical evidence, documents, medical records, something that couldn't be explained away by high-priced lawyers and friendly judges. The suite's adjoining room served as James Sterling's private office, filled with filing cabinets and computer equipment that looked far too sophisticated for an Alzheimer's patient. Martha immediately began photographing documents while Sam accessed the computer system using passwords he'd observed Marcus entering during their conversation. What they found exceeded their worst expectations. The Sterling network hadn't just covered up Vietnam War crimes, they had used those techniques to establish an ongoing program of human experimentation, witness elimination, and government manipulation that had operated for 5 decades. Medical files showed dozens of veterans who had been used as test subjects for experimental treatments, their consent obtained through deception or coercion. Financial records revealed bribes paid to officials in the VA, the Pentagon, and various federal agencies. Communication logs documented the systematic elimination of witnesses, including Sam's grandfather and Martha's husband. But it was the current operations folder that made Sam's blood run cold. Liberty hadn't just died from medical complications. She had been deliberately poisoned with a compound designed to cause heart failure that would be indistinguishable from age-related decline. The poisoning had been administered by Sterling's medical technician during the helicopter transport, ensuring that Sam would be emotionally devastated and compliant during the evidence recovery operation. "They killed her to control me," Sam whispered, his voice thick with grief and rage. Martha's face had gone pale as she read over his shoulder. "Samuel, look at this. They have files on dozens of veterans and their families. Anyone connected to Phoenix program witnesses, anyone who might have inherited evidence or knowledge of the operations." The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. The Sterling network had been monitoring the families of Vietnam veterans for decades, eliminating threats before they could fully develop. Sam's inheritance of the cave property had triggered an automated surveillance protocol that had been tracking his activities for months. "We need to get this information to real federal authorities," Martha said, copying files onto multiple storage devices. But as they prepared to leave with their evidence, alarms began sounding throughout the facility. Emergency lighting bathed the hallways in red, and the sound of running footsteps echoed from multiple directions. "They know we're here," Sam said, his military training automatically assessing escape routes and defensive positions. Through the office window, they could see vehicles surrounding the facility, not just security guards, but armed personnel wearing tactical gear. Marcus Sterling's voice crackled over an intercom system. "Mr. Cooper, Mrs. Hartley, I know you're inside. You've seen information that threatens national security. Surrender now and we can discuss terms." Sam checked his watch. They had been inside the facility for less than 30 minutes, but somehow Sterling's forces had mobilized with impressive speed. Either they had been expected, or the network's surveillance capabilities were even more sophisticated than the documents suggested. "There's another way out," Martha said, studying building schematics she'd brought in her folder. "Service tunnel that connects to the old cemetery drainage system. William discovered it during his original investigation." But as they prepared to use Martha's escape route, James Sterling's voice echoed through the intercom with chilling clarity. "Samuel Cooper, your dog died because you were too stubborn to accept reasonable terms. Your wife Rebecca died because you served in operations that required management of potential witnesses. How many more people you care about will die before you accept that some secrets are too dangerous for public consumption?" The revelation hit Sam like a physical blow. Rebecca's cancer hadn't been random. It had been induced, part of the same systematic elimination program that had claimed dozens of other families over the years. The Sterling network hadn't just killed his grandfather and his dog, they had murdered his wife. In that moment, Sam Cooper ceased to be a grieving veteran struggling with moral complexity. He became what his military training had designed him to be, a weapon pointed at an enemy that had taken everything he loved. The war wasn't over. It had simply been waiting for the right moment to demand its final victory. As armed figures breached the facility's main entrance, Sam and Martha disappeared into the service tunnel system, carrying evidence that could expose 50 years of systematic murder and corruption. Behind them, James Sterling's voice continued its casual recitation of atrocities, unaware that his words had just created an enemy more dangerous than any he had faced during his original war crimes. The drainage tunnel beneath the Sterling Cemetery led to a culvert system that emerged near an abandoned farm 2 miles from the medical facility. Sam and Martha crawled through decades of accumulated debris and standing water, their clothes soaked and torn by the time they reached the surface. Behind them, the sound of pursuing voices echoed through the tunnels, but the network of passages was too complex for Sterling's men to follow effectively. Martha's sedan was gone, confiscated or destroyed by Sterling's security team. They found themselves on a county road at dawn, carrying evidence that could expose 50 years of systematic murder with no transportation and nowhere safe to turn. "There's a small airport about 10 miles north," Martha said, studying a road map she'd kept in her jacket pocket. "William used it during his investigation. The owner is an old Army pilot who doesn't ask questions about cash payments." But Sam was no longer thinking about escape routes. The revelation about Rebecca's murder had crystallized something fundamental in his mind. Running would save their lives temporarily, but it wouldn't stop the Sterling network from continuing their operations. Someone else's wife would die of induced cancer. Someone else's loyal dog would be poisoned. Someone else's grandfather would suffer a convenient accident. "We're not running," he said quietly. Martha stopped walking and stared at him. "Samuel, they have private armies and government connections. We have some documents and testimony that any decent lawyer can discredit. We need to get this information to federal authorities and let them—" "Which federal authorities?" Sam interrupted. "The ones Sterling mentioned who work inside the Bureau? The Pentagon officials on his payroll? The VA administrators who've been covering up medical experimentation on veterans?" Martha's silence acknowledged the impossible complexity of their situation. Every institution they might turn to for help had been compromised by decades of Sterling influence and corruption. Sam pulled out his phone and began making calls to numbers he hadn't dialed in years. Former military contacts, veterans advocates, investigative journalists who specialized in government accountability. Most of the calls went to voicemail, but gradually he began building a network of support from people who existed outside Sterling's sphere of influence. The breakthrough came when he reached David Chen, a documentary filmmaker who had been investigating veteran suicides and medical misconduct for the past 5 years. Chen had noticed patterns in VA records that suggested systematic targeting of certain veteran populations, but lacked evidence to prove his theories. "I can have a camera crew at your location within 2 hours," Chen said after Sam outlined their situation. "We'll broadcast everything live, upload it simultaneously to multiple platforms." "They can't suppress information that's already public." Martha shook her head. "Samuel, going public with this will make us permanent targets. Even if we expose the Sterling network, there will be others who continue their work. We'll spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders." "Then we don't plan on having much longer to look," Sam replied with grim determination. "Some fights are worth dying for, Martha. Your husband understood that. My dog understood it. Now it's our turn." 3 hours later, they stood in front of Chen's cameras in a field outside Fayetteville, Arkansas, with the evidence spread on a makeshift table. The live broadcast reached thousands of viewers initially, but the numbers climbed rapidly as social media shares amplified their message. Sam spoke directly to the camera, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen combat and understood the cost of truth. "My name is Samuel Cooper. I'm a Vietnam veteran whose wife was murdered by cancer induced by people who wanted to keep war crimes secret. My dog Liberty was poisoned to control my behavior. My grandfather was killed for protecting evidence of ongoing government corruption." Martha held up documents as Sam described each piece of evidence: medical records showing human experimentation, financial records proving bribery of federal officials, communication logs documenting the systematic elimination of witnesses over 5 decades. The Sterling Network's response was swift and predictable. Within 30 minutes of the broadcast beginning, their phones started receiving calls from people claiming to represent various federal agencies, demanding they cease transmission and surrender the documents. But Chen's crew continued broadcasting, and the evidence continued reaching viewers across the country. The turning point came when Marcus Sterling himself called Sam's phone during the live broadcast. Sam answered on speaker, allowing the conversation to be heard by thousands of viewers. "Mr. Cooper, you're making a serious mistake," Sterling said, his voice carrying its familiar tone of controlled authority. "The information you're broadcasting threatens ongoing intelligence operations. American lives are at risk." "American lives have been at risk for 50 years because of your family's crimes," Sam replied. "How many veterans have died in your medical experiments? How many families have been destroyed to protect your secrets? You don't understand the complexities involved. Some sacrifices are necessary to protect national security." "National security?" Sam's voice rose with decades of suppressed rage. "You murdered my wife. You killed my dog. You've been using veterans as test subjects for experimental treatments. That's not national security, that's terrorism." Sterling's response revealed the depth of his delusion. "Every war requires casualties, Mr. Cooper. Your wife, your dog, your grandfather, they died serving a cause larger than themselves. The Phoenix program and its successors have prevented conflicts that would have killed thousands more Americans." The admission was broadcast live to an audience that had grown to over 50,000 viewers. Sterling had just confessed to decades of murder on camera, believing he was justified in his actions. But the Sterling Network's resources extended beyond damage control. As the broadcast continued, black SUVs began surrounding the field where they were filming. Armed men took positions around the perimeter, clearly preparing for an assault that would end the transmission permanently. Sam looked at the approaching forces, then at Martha, who had lived with fear and anger for 50 years, waiting for this moment of vindication. Chen's camera crew continued broadcasting even as they prepared for violence. "This is what justice looks like," Sam said to the camera. Not courtrooms and legal procedures, but ordinary people standing up to power and refusing to be silenced. My dog Liberty led me to truth that was buried for half a century. That truth is now public. Whatever happens to us, the evidence survives. As Sterling's men began their final approach, helicopters appeared on the horizon. But these weren't Sterling's aircraft. Federal agents who had been monitoring the live broadcast were arriving in force, finally moved to action by public pressure and undeniable evidence. The siege that followed lasted 6 hours, with Sterling's private army surrounded by legitimate federal agents while tens of thousands of people watched online. Marcus Sterling was taken into custody along with his security team, while his elderly father was arrested at the medical facility. In the aftermath, Sam and Martha found themselves at the center of a media storm that would reshape public understanding of government accountability and veterans' rights. The Sterling Network's collapse led to investigations that exposed corruption in multiple federal agencies and resulted in the largest veteran reparations program in American history. But for Sam, standing in that field as the sun set over Arkansas mountains, the victory felt hollow without liberty beside him to share it. Justice had been served, but at a cost that would echo through the remainder of his days. 6 months later, Samuel Cooper stood before the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., his weathered hand resting on the granite panel that bore the names of his fallen comrades. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and distant memories, but for the first time in years, those memories brought comfort rather than pain. The Sterling trials had concluded with convictions that would keep the conspirators imprisoned for life. More importantly, the revelations had sparked the largest Veterans Affairs reform in American history. The Veterans Truth and Reconciliation Act had established independent oversight of VA medical programs, compensation funds for families affected by unauthorized experimentation, and whistleblower protections for healthcare workers. "She would have been proud of what you accomplished," a familiar voice said behind him. Sam turned to find Marcus Sterling approaching, flanked by 2 federal marshals. The younger man wore prison clothing and restraints, but his expression carried none of the arrogance Sam remembered from their confrontations. "Supervised visit to pay respects to his mother," one of the marshals explained. "Vietnamese American Memorial Section. We thought you might want to speak with him." Marcus stopped a respectful distance away, his eyes focused on the memorial wall rather than Sam's face. "I wanted you to know that everything my father told you about your wife was lies. Rebecca's cancer was natural, random, cruel in the way that disease is cruel. He said those things to break your spirit, not because they were true." The relief Sam felt was physical, like a weight lifting from his chest. For months, he'd carried the burden of believing Rebecca's death had been orchestrated, that his love for her had somehow made her a target. "Thank you for telling me," Sam said quietly. "My mother used to say that the dead deserve truth even when it's painful. Your wife died because cancer is evil, not because people are. That's not justice, but it's not malice either." Marcus's voice carried the weariness of someone who had confronted the full scope of his family's crimes. "The memorial here has a section for Vietnamese civilians killed during the war. My mother's name is there now, along with thousands of others who died because of American actions." They walked together toward the newer section of the memorial, where names were etched in both English and Vietnamese. Sam found himself thinking about the cycles of violence and reconciliation, how one generation's crimes could become the next generation's opportunity for healing. "What happens now?" Sam asked. 25 to life without parole. But the Foundation's assets are being redistributed to veteran support programs and Vietnamese community organizations. My mother would have approved of that use of Sterling money. Marcus paused at a panel bearing his mother's name. "I wanted to honor her memory by protecting my father's legacy. Instead, I dishonored both of them." The federal marshals indicated their time was ending, but Marcus had one final message. The veterinary hospital where Liberty died has established a fund for emergency medical care for service dogs. They're calling it the Liberty Cooper Memorial Fund. I thought you should know. As Marcus was led away, Sam remained at the memorial, processing the complexity of justice and forgiveness. The Sterling Network's collapse had brought accountability, but it hadn't restored the dead or erased the decades of suffering their actions had caused. His phone buzzed with a text message from Martha Hartley, who had moved to Oregon to live near her daughter after the trials concluded. Watching the news about the new veteran support programs, William would be proud. How are you doing? Sam typed back. Healing. Slowly. Thank you for everything. The truth was that Sam was indeed healing, but not in the ways he'd expected. The justice they'd fought for had been achieved, but it hadn't filled the empty spaces in his heart where Rebecca and Liberty had lived. Instead, those spaces had been transformed into something different, a capacity for helping others who carried similar wounds. He'd been invited to testify before Congress about veteran medical programs, to serve on advisory boards for animal therapy organizations, to speak at universities about government accountability. The inheritance that had seemed worthless had become the foundation for a new kind of service. Walking back toward his hotel, Sam passed a small park where an elderly veteran sat on a bench, sharing his lunch with a scraggly German Shepherd mix that looked like it had seen better days. The sight stopped Sam in his tracks, memory and present reality blending in ways that took his breath away. He approached the bench carefully, not wanting to disturb the peaceful scene. The veteran looked up, a man about Sam's age, wearing a faded army jacket and eyes that carried familiar weight. "Beautiful dog," Sam said. "Found her at the shelter last week. They said she'd been returned 3 times. Too old, too much trouble, medical problems." The veteran's hands were gentle as he stroked the dog's graying muzzle. "Figured we could be too old and too much trouble together." Sam sat on the other end of the bench, watching the easy companionship between man and dog. "What's her name?" "Hope." Seemed appropriate. The veteran glanced at Sam's VA hospital identification badge, recognizing a fellow traveler. "You have a dog?" "I did. German Shepherd named Liberty. She died saving my life in a way." Sam found himself smiling at the memory rather than grieving it. "She led me to something I needed to find, even though it cost her everything." They sat in comfortable silence, 2 old soldiers watching Hope finish her share of sandwich with dignified gratitude. The autumn sun was warm on their faces, and the city noise faded into background whisper. "My granddaughter keeps asking me to tell her war stories," the veteran said eventually. "But I don't know how to explain that the real stories aren't about battles. They're about coming home and learning how to live with what you've seen." "Maybe that's exactly what you tell her," Sam replied. "That the hardest battles happen after you come home, and the real victory is learning how to love again despite everything you've lost." Hope lifted her head and looked directly at Sam, her brown eyes holding intelligence and warmth that reminded him powerfully of Liberty. For a moment he felt his companion's presence as clearly as if she were sitting beside him, approving of this new connection, this small act of understanding between strangers. As the afternoon light began to fade, Sam stood to leave, but the veteran called after him, "If you're ever in town again, we'll be here most afternoons. Hope likes meeting new people, and I could use the company." "I'd like that," Sam said, meaning it completely. Walking away from the park, Sam felt something he hadn't experienced since before Rebecca's diagnosis: anticipation for the future. Not the desperate hoping of someone clinging to fading possibilities, but the quiet confidence of a person who had survived the worst and discovered that life continued to offer unexpected gifts. The inheritance had been more valuable than gold or land. It had been the gift of purpose restored, of justice served, of love that transcended loss. Liberty had led him through darkness into light, and that light would continue shining long after her earthly journey had ended. Samuel's story reminds us that our most treasured relationships often come with 4 legs and unconditional hearts. At our stage of life, we understand the profound bond between humans and their faithful companions. How a dog's love can sustain us through loss, illness, and the inevitable challenges of aging. Like Samuel, many of us have watched helplessly as beloved pets decline, knowing that medical care costs can force impossible choices between financial security and compassionate care. Yet Liberty's legacy shows us that even in our golden years, we possess the power to fight injustice and create meaningful change. Samuel's courage at 67 proves that age doesn't diminish our capacity for heroism. It refines it. His willingness to risk everything for truth, despite Medicare worries and limited resources, speaks to the values our generation holds sacred: loyalty, integrity, and protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The story's conclusion offers hope that our struggles can transform into purpose, our grief into action, and our love for faithful companions into lasting positive change for others facing similar battles. Discussion questions. Have you ever had to make difficult financial decisions about medical care for a beloved pet? And how did that experience shape your understanding of the human-animal bond? What injustices in our government systems do you feel need the kind of courage Samuel showed, regardless of our age? Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your stories matter and can inspire others in our community.